Hi everyone, thanks for stopping by. So, are you ready for a little card making inspiration using watercolors and embossing powders? Well then, let's get started. I'm going to be using these watercolors that I have not used in years, and they're called Twinkling H2Os, and they have a shimmer to them because they have mica powder in them. And oh my gosh, I have so many different colors of these, and I love them. And even though you can't buy them anymore, you can use any watercolor for these techniques. So for this one, I'm just going to be using two different shades of blue and creating a slight ombre effect. But mostly what I wanted to show you with this technique is that you can create designs and patterns and visual textures just by using your brush. You can create the appearance of waves or clouds or just pretty patterns. Of course, you can always just put your watercolors on nice and smooth, but I just want you to see that there's other variations and other options. It really just depends on the strokes that you use or even the brushes that you use. So just have fun and experiment and see what you come up with. For the subtle ombre effect that I'm going to be creating, I'm just turning my watercolor paper around and starting on the other end with the darker blue. And I'm just going to work my way up until I meet the lighter blue, and then I'm going to start blending them together. Now here's where you're going to see me start to make the textures or designs, and actually I am going for a wavy look, and you will see that in the end. But I'm just working my brush in such a way to create that design, and that's really all you need to do as well, is just work your brush in such a way that it creates the design that you're going for. And then here I'm just adding some water to kind of help blend things together a little bit more and keep it wet enough for me to continue to make that design. And here's what that looks like, and I absolutely love, love, love that ocean look, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I know it's going to be something special. Okay, so this next technique that I'm going to show you is pretty random, and you don't have to be an artist to do this. All I'm doing is laying down some colors to create a background that will be hidden, in this case, by a beautiful die cut. But it could also be used for embossing or stamping, and you can even die cut things out of it, such as flowers and butterflies and words. And, that's something I'll show you here in a minute as well. But there's really no rhyme or reason to this. Just lay down some colors that you want for the background, and then you can just kind of, smooth them out and work them together like I'm doing right now. And it really doesn't matter how many colors you use or where you place them, because no matter what you do, it will come out beautiful. Now, I could have stopped with just these colors, but I want to add some other colors. As you can see, I have the green sitting over there. And when you are going to make a drastic change in colors, you don't want it to get muddy. So what you're going to want to do is let it dry, and you can let it air dry, or you can use a heat gun like I'm going to use here. And then once that is done, I am going to come in with the green, and you can do this with a thinner brush. I should have, but I just kept using the same size brush. But basically, I'm just, drawing squiggles. I mean, you could be more artistic than what I'm doing. Obviously, I think a kindergartner can do what I'm doing. But, you could be a little bit more artistic about it. And then once you have that done, this is what it's going to look like. And now we're going to get on to the second part of this, which is creating the die cut that's going to go over it. So this beautiful die that I'm using is from In Love Arts, and I'll put a link below in the description box to that. And the paper I'm using is a rose gold cardstock from Michaels. So I ran this through my Cuttlebug, and then I discovered that this die is a lot more intricate than I thought, and weeding all of those little pieces out of there took forever. And it turns out that this die cut image is a lot more delicate than I thought. So I used a spray adhesive, and it was very difficult to lay down because it was so flimsy, but I still love it. And this background with that die cut over it really turned out to be a beautiful card. And here's another example of that same technique, and for this one I cut butterflies out, and I think they look just beautiful. Okay, now we're going to have some fun using embossing powder. And the one I'm using is called Sparkle, and that's all it does. It just adds sparkle and no color. So to start off, I'm just laying down this pink watercolor, and I'm just swiping it on there, not even going edge to edge. And now I'm going to use my heat gun, and I'm going to dry that a little bit. And once that is dry, I'm going to go back over it with this pearl watercolor. Now the other stuff had shimmer as well, but this is just adding a little bit of extra pearl. And while that is still wet, I'm going to be sprinkling on the embossing powder. And it's totally up to you whether you sprinkle it all over or just in random spots, because no matter how you do it, it is going to look beautiful. And now it's time to use that heat gun and set the embossing powder. Sorry, I was totally off screen for that, but you all know how to do this anyway. And now let's take a look at the beautiful shimmery results that we got. And that made a perfect card topper for this Valentine card. So for this next one, I'm still going to be using embossing powder, but it's just a different variation on it. So when I started off, I wanted to go for a vintage masculine look and use some earthy tones. So I started off with this brown. But as I went along, I decided that I wanted to add another color. So I decided to go with this orange. So then I went from thinking about vintage masculine to thinking about fall, and I probably could have added some more fall colors to this, but I didn't. And once I was done putting on the colors, but while it was still wet, it was time to start adding the embossing powder. My plan was to sprinkle it on randomly, but the embossing powder kept sticking to the spatula I'm using, so I just kept adding a little more here and a little more there. You can also just use your fingers and get, pinches of the embossing powder and sprinkle it on that way. And of course, you can put on as much or as little embossing powder as you want for the look that you're going for. It's totally up to you. And once I was satisfied with the amount of embossing powder I had on there, I got out the heat gun to set the embossing powder, and this is the look that I came up with. It may not look like much now, but it was perfect for cutting out these fall leaves. Aren't they just beautiful? So for this next one, I'm going to use a piece that I watercolored off camera, and I'm going to be heat embossing it using this beautiful dandelion stamp from In Love Arts. It's a background stamp, and so it's really big, and I had no way to use a magnet to hold it in place. Usually when stamping on watercolor paper, you need to stamp it 2 or 3 times just because it's textured, but because I didn't have a way to hold it in place with a magnet, I was afraid to stamp it more than once. I was really afraid if I tried to stamp it a second or third time that it wouldn't line up and it would just be a blurry mess, and I didn't want that to happen. Okay, so now it's time to add the embossing powder and see how good of an image that we got. To be honest, I was really nervous and wasn't sure that there was anything on that paper at all. But once I put on the embossing powder and then shook off the excess, there it was. And I have to admit, it's not as detailed as it would have been had it been stamped on, regular cardstock, or had I been able to, stamp it 2 or 3 times and made sure that I had enough of the embossing ink on there. But you know what? I still think it came out beautiful. And I think the card I made with it is quite elegant. Thank you all for stopping by, and I hope these fun watercolor and embossing powder techniques gave you some ideas of your own to experiment with. And below in the description box, you'll find links to the floral background die and the wild daisy background stamp from In Love Arts, as well as a 25% off discount code. Happy crafting, everyone! Bye-bye.
If you like this video, I hope you give it a thumbs up. And if you're not already subscribed, I hope you consider that too. And if you do, be sure to click the little bell next to the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any upcoming videos or giveaways. And I hope you stop by Crafters Castle on Facebook and also Crafters Castle Challenge blog to enter your creations.